Salam and peace. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Muslim Network TV is always there 24/7. We air on a satellite, Galaxy 19 satellite, which covers the whole United States, Canada, and Mexico. We also are available through streaming on Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, Roku, and of course, you can download our app, Muslim Network TV, on your iPhone or Android and watch it there. Our website is muslimnetwork.tv. And election and the transition, and whole lot of people are worried. I mean, the election workers are cyclical workers. When elections are over, they get to do something with their lives. People who are in the government on a political jobs, they will be, preparing their resumes and submitting. People who are coming in, so out of hundreds and thousands of political workers, there was a time when all of them will be accommodated somewhere. Actually, the president, according to our constitution in the United States, has sole authority to nominate office holders. The appointment clause of the Article 2 specifically states the president, I quote, shall nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States, whose appointments are not herein within provided for and which shall be established by law. That's in the Constitution. And it has been practiced in an amazing way. At one time, 75% of all federal employees were working in a post office. And in 1881, more than 50% of all federal jobs were just patronage job. You work for the president, help him get elected. I'm not saying her elected because we haven't elected any of that kind. So he will just go ahead and keep appointing people. And actually, in 1988, President Cleveland, no, he's not named after Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland, Ohio is named after him. He replaced nearly 40,000 postmasters around the country because those are the guys who were supporters of the past president, and now he need to appoint his own people. One president, James Garfield, actually was shot and killed in 1881 by election worker and a job seeker. He wanted to be appointed as ambassador of the US ambassador to France. I don't know what happened to him, but he murdered the president because he didn't appoint him. Today, it's no longer such a party time. Nowadays, only 7,000 people are appointed by president. They are called political appointees. Originally, the system was called spoil system. Then it became patronage system. Now it has a more limited scope, and there are politically correct word is political appointments. And I don't know a whole lot about it, but when I was going through political science, I read somewhere that some president appointed actually more than 100,000 people. Well, that time is gone. Chicago was last city, I would say, last country rather, who had the political patronage system running until a judge ordered something, I think in late 70s. Last century, that system started going check. So discuss with us is somebody who knows it all in this area, who works for politicians, raises money for them, help them get elected, and is a political consultant, and has written actually a book about insider tips on getting a job in politics, and no other than Alexandra Acker-Lyons. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, Alexandra.
Hello, thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Alexandra is a recognized political commentator And when I was one of the elected leader of Democratic Party, she was head of Young Democrats in the colleges, I think. All right. And so tell me, how the political appointments of Biden, President-elect Biden's are going right now.
Well, the president-elect, for those of us who decided to call him that yet, has started to make some staff appointments. He announced Ron Klain will be his chief of staff and Jen O'Malley-Dillon will be deputy chief of staff. He's announced a couple of other positions. And there is a real stratification to how this works. You have to appoint those top levels first and then start to fill in. So the biggest advice I have to people who are looking to go into the new administration is to be patient. That includes people who worked on the campaign and may have close ties to those senior people being brought in. But it takes a long time to kind of get down to the mid and junior level staff that make up the vast majority of these appointments, and 1,500 of these appointments have to be confirmed by the Senate. Of course, they start with the cabinet level appointees and the very senior staff, but that process takes some time, and it's a process that if Mitch McConnell is the majority leader, he can slow down and force Joe Biden to negotiate over certain appointments. We saw President Trump make a lot of use of acting appointments that don't need Senate confirmation, but then they can only be in that role for 120 days. So be patient and let the process work itself out.
Now, tell me the couple of people President-elect Biden has appointed. What type of people are these?
Ron Klain is one of the most respected political hands in Washington. He was Vice President Biden's chief of staff when he was the vice president. He also was Vice President Gore's chief of staff. He was the Ebola czar. He is just someone who really knows Washington, D.C., knows how to get things done in all the branches of government, knows how to use soft power, for instance, how to get outside lobbyists to kind of line up. He is an excellent choice for this role. Jen O'Malley-Dillon, who was Vice President Biden's campaign manager, is also an excellent choice. She is second to none in terms of being able to get vast organizations up and running. She's smart, she's savvy, and she has a very cool head under pressure, which is certainly a quality you need in the White House. He's also bringing in Cedric Richmond as a senior advisor. He is a congressman from Louisiana. He is African American and has close ties to the Congressional Black Caucus and other Black leaders. And of course, it was Black voters who really propelled Joe Biden to the nomination and to this win. So that will be a very important voice to have in the circle as well.
If the chief of his staff has worked for President Ford, he must be older than Biden then.
Ron Klain didn't work for Ford. He worked for Al Gore. I'm sorry if I misspoke.
Okay, so that's slightly. Okay, all right. So are political appointment necessary? What about a good civil servant? The reform came into being, a spoil system to patronage system. But there is a well-established civil service. Why not trust a civil servant instead of political appointees?
I think it depends on the type of job you want. There are a ton of civil service jobs that are empty. The Trump administration caused a lot of longtime civil servants to leave because they were just so unhappy with some of the policies being put forward. And then a huge number of those roles were never filled by the Trump administration. So there are two paths. And you can also apply once you have been a political appointee to become part of the permanent civil service. That is a slightly different process. But so there are kind of two paths. The political appointees tend to be more senior. And the civil service roles, obviously, you're there under numerous administrations. So you may not always agree with the policies being put forth, but that's the job.
So why President Trump is dissatisfied with the civil servants and civil service? I mean, aren't there, he has introduced some type of executive order to make it easier to let them go or something like that?
Yes, President Trump did put forward an executive order to essentially take away some of the protections that civil servants have for when they do disagree politically with the administration. I can't see this being enforced. This is, I think, one of those things that he decided one day and forgot about the next. But this is certainly a longstanding tradition that the vast majority of what the government does should not be considered political. Things like getting the mail delivered or the weather service should not be political. And unfortunately, we saw the Trump administration make them very political. I expect us to go back to some of the norms from the previous 240 years where that was not the case, and where we just have good, smart, honest public servants who are doing the work to keep our government going at all levels. And I expect that the Biden administration, if that rule is put into effect, will immediately overturn it. There are also a number of government workers who are members of labor unions. And so you can't kind of wipe away those contracts with an executive order.
Well, you know, in the historic system, post office has played a very large role, not only just appointments, dismissing people, but also because the post office at that time was the internet of that time. In a way,
Right.
If you're not in post office, you cannot communicate, and the government will subsidize sending the material. Still, when government, letters will come, I think government is not paying post office to send them out. They used to send newsletters and all of that stuff. But still, it is important. I mean, the current postmaster general appointed by the president makes more money than the vice president makes, and he has played a very critical political role by dismantling all the machines and all that. I mean, I was surprised that post office was still able to deliver despite all of those problems. So it seems that the elected leadership and the existing civil servant, there is a level of tension between them historically, but it seems to have come to life much more when people are being dismissed and some people are unsure about what they're going to happen. And that is also opportunity for President-elect. How many chief of staff Trump has in the last 4 years?
Right. Yes. I mean, the politicization of something like the Postal Service, I think, infuriated a lot of those workers who don't see their job as political, do see it as critical infrastructure for keeping the country going. And I think one of the big lessons learned, I think, over the last 4 years is that a lot of the norms that our government operated under can be manipulated by bad actors. And so I think we will see, and I know that there have been several different efforts, most of them bipartisan in nature, to examine what some of those norms are and codify them into law so that we don't have these problems again. But yes, Postal Service is huge, lots of good jobs, lots of good union jobs, and obviously in every corner of the country. So to your introduction, when you talked about how that used to be a huge boon to patronage, that was certainly one of the premier jobs to have, was to be the Postmaster General of an outpost. And now we have seen with the federal government expanding in the post-World War II era, that those jobs are still absolutely critical, but not quite the same kind of political role that they used to be.
Do you agree that, the political appointments and the sort of patronage not only at federal level, but continues at, city and county and state level as well. I mean, isn't this part of the accepted phenomena that you work for a campaign and then, you will get into administration and find some jobs?
Certainly there are, the government hires tenfold the number of people that a campaign does. So there are certainly people who are hired into these roles who did not work on the campaign. And there are campaign folks whose skills are transferable to other roles. But for instance, you don't need a fundraiser in the government. So there are different paths that people can take, but for sure, a lot of those, 25-year-olds who were field organizers in places like Florida and Arizona are all hoping that they get to immediately vault to their fancy West Wing job and be Josh Lyman like on the TV show The West Wing. That's certainly what I thought when I was 25.
You're watching Muslim Network TV, and this is Imam Malik Mujahid talking with Alexandra Acker-Lyons, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid talking with Alexandra Acker-Lyons. Tell me, what is the size of political workers, say, who participated as a staff in the presidential campaign, or maybe in senatorial and congressional, in the federal campaigns? Any idea about the magnitude of this staff?
It's in the tens of thousands for sure. Obviously, it was a little bit different this year because of COVID-19 and the Democratic Party doing primarily remote organizing. So there were people who were organizers for a battleground state who didn't live in that state and maybe never even stepped foot in it, which is certainly unusual. But presidential campaigns are usually around 10,000 staff. Some of them may be hourly. Some of them only come on for the last couple of weeks. And then kind of the further you go down the ballot, the smaller the staffs tend to be. Statewide races like a Senate campaign or a gubernatorial campaign, depending on the size of the state and the number of voters, may have hundreds or thousands of staff. And then, the size of the staff gets smaller depending on the number of voters that you have to talk to.
So who are these people? What's the, for the absence of another word, what is the profile of these people? One is you, of course, but who are these people?
It depends. I used to be one of those people. My husband used to be one of those people where you kind of hop around from campaign to campaign and job to job. It is an unstable lifestyle and paycheck, to be sure. But you either are doing it because this is the career path that you have chosen, and it's important to work on a lot of different campaigns and kind of move up. My book is called The Political Ladder because you move up the political ladder and get more responsibility with every job. And then there are people who are just really inspired by a specific candidate or a specific moment. We saw that with Barack Obama's campaign in 2008. Certainly the Trump campaign saw it this time around with people who just really believe in that candidacy and want to take some time off from their normal life and go work on a campaign for a few months. It is an incredibly rewarding experience. And I sometimes joke that it's like going to war because you have this very short, intense period of time. Sometimes you'll only work with someone for a month and they will be your friend for life because you have been in the trenches together.
So is it so these people are mostly educated people, mostly young people? Is that true?
Mostly young for sure, in part because of the lifestyle, in part because of the pay. But it does vary quite a bit. And for people who do this as a profession and move up through the ranks, and you go from being a field organizer to a regional field organizer to a field director to perhaps a campaign manager, that takes several cycles. Or you move up over the course of a presidential campaign. You start off junior and kind of work your way up with more responsibility. Education level varies, but yes, primarily college educated, and increasingly more diverse. There have been a lot of efforts through organizations like Repower and Inclusive and The Arena, and so many others to help make this a more stable career cycle, especially for lower income young people, people of color, to try to have more stability in between jobs so that this can be their chosen career path.
Mm. So it is increased diversity in there. How these? I mean, these people are the one who study, say, social sciences mostly, or people who have studied other subject also get into this?
Yes, often a lot of political science majors like me, but certainly not all. Communications backgrounds are very important. Increasingly, computer and digital skills are very important. Data analysis and things like statistics are very important for targeting, for polling, even for fundraising in these days. So generally, if you have a good attitude and are willing to learn, you can find a place in these campaigns. But having a little bit of prior knowledge of what to expect can be helpful.
So are there people who train people to get into this, or once you get hired, then you get some training?
Both. There are organizations that help train you before you go on a campaign. Sometimes it's very intense week-long training. That's something that an organization like Emily's List does, where they train campaign managers and fundraising directors and field directors. Often you have some experience, but are learning to gain additional skills. And then, yes, once you go on the campaign, kind of depending on your role, you are formally or informally mentored and trained on what to do.
And that's where probably those relationships are formed, which takes you into the consideration when a candidate wins and wants you to continue to work for her.
Absolutely, yes. So if you worked for a more senior staffer or were a really standout junior staffer, it is certainly easier to get hired more quickly. But like I said, there are more government jobs than there are campaign workers. So if people are patient and they did a good job on the campaign, they'll be able to find a role.
This is very important line which you had. There are more government jobs than there are political workers.
Very much so. I mean, it might not be the most important or flashiest job in the world, but there are thousands and thousands of roles to be filled. And a huge number of people who work on a campaign don't want to go into the government. This was something that they were doing for a 3 or 6 month or a year of their life. They don't want to move to DC, or they don't want to, leave their family. We will see how all of that is impacted in the next 6 months or so with everyone working remotely. And we'll see how this remote workforce kind of continues into things like government. But for the most part, there's plenty of jobs to go around if you proved yourself on the campaign.
So you're saying that a large number of politically, staffers in the campaign don't necessarily want to go to DC or work for the government and things like that. So why, how they can afford to quit their job dedicate this time, are they really so secure financially? Are they nuts like you?
It varies a lot. So, and something that we've seen increasingly in recent Democratic campaigns is workers forming a union, precisely because it is insecure. And we have gotten better as a party about walking the walk and providing things like healthcare and keeping people on their healthcare even after the campaign is over, which is something that the Biden campaign is doing. So it does vary. I mean, there are people who, I used to live in Silicon Valley. There was an organization that would help train tech workers to go be the tech staffer on a campaign, and they were very financially secure and could afford to take that pay cut for 6 months or 3 months. For a huge number of people, campaigns don't pay well, but they pay more than a service industry job. So you have to plan accordingly for periods of unemployment between campaigns. But one of the good things about this election cycle is that we're going immediately into a very competitive midterm election after redistricting and reapportionment. So there will be an even higher number of very competitive elections in 2022. And so a lot of people who worked on this campaign might take a couple of months off if they don't want to go into the federal government or another government role. Those elections will start to staff up in the coming months.
So that's fascinating. I mean, this is how these people, political, electoral workers, how do they communicate? Do they have their own group chat systems and WhatsApp systems? How they talk to each other? How they work?
There are always kind of post-campaign email listservs, and that's how a lot of job notices and things get passed around. I am sure that there are all kinds of other forms of communication that I, as a 42-year-old, am not familiar with, and certainly WhatsApp threads and text threads, but there's usually something formal that the campaign sets up to be able to communicate with staff after the campaign. And then, of course, there are informal communication channels as well.
So in the before the election, in the primaries, when there were so many presidential candidates, if Biden has about 10,000 staff working for him, how many all these presidential candidates, small and the large? I mean, do they have staff in say 200-300 or larger?
Yes, a lot of primary campaign staffers did eventually go over to the Biden campaign or went to some of the organizations that kind of exist around the campaign. So the 501c4 organizations or super PACs or consulting firms that are working maybe not only on the presidential campaign, but on down ballot races as well. So there is this large ecosystem where the Biden campaign was kind of not the only game in town. And some of those folks are hired seasonally just for the election cycle, and some of them are brought on in a more permanent basis, and it just kind of varies depending on what the role is. But like I said, because we're heading into this competitive midterm, the lull between that will be shorter than it has been in the past.
Tell me this, what is more important, relationship, connections, or that you have bundled a whole lot of money?
Oh, I definitely think relationships. And, I didn't come from a politically connected family or a wealthy family. And I just kind of went out there and tried to meet as many people as possible, and was very diligent in keeping track of my contacts and keeping in touch with people year after year. And that has proven to be incredibly helpful. Not only for me, it's the advice I always give people. Certainly if you have donated or raised a lot of money for the campaign, that is nice and helpful, and they look kindly on it, but there are many, many more ways to be helpful than that. And obviously, as a young person, unless you come from a wealthy family, that's not going to be your entry point. You're going to have to go do the work and prove yourself. But that's true for the bundlers as well. There are plenty of wealthy people who are sometimes more trouble than they're worth in terms of what they give versus the headaches that they cause.
Well, I heard that, I mean, of course, some president got shot because somebody wanted to become ambassador of France, and he didn't make him the ambassador of France. But I heard that if you have bundled about $1 million, you can get, some type of small ambassadorial appointment, because ambassadors are either career diplomats or they're political appointees. So is there some truth to that?
There is some truth to that. Unfortunately, I think it's a terrible way to appoint ambassadors, but it's also unfortunately the case that when you are an ambassador, part of your job is throwing parties, and your budget isn't necessarily very big for that. And so they do kind of look to wealthier folks to fill some of those roles because they can supplement their income and their budget. It's something that I hope we'll see less of in the Biden administration. It's something that we saw somewhat less of under the Obama administration. And certainly there are some people who are bundlers because they want something in return, and there are some people who are bundlers just for the good of the cause. And there's politics in every job and in every industry, but of course, there's a lot of politics in politics.
That is so true. Everywhere human beings are, there is some politics about power. And in politics, definitely, it's all politics, right? You're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid talking with Alexandra Acker-Lyons, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid talking with Alexandra Acker-Lyons. Tell me, why did you decide to write that book about?
So I used to be the executive director of an organization that has now evolved in its mission, but at the time, Democratic Gain was the professional organization for political operatives, and spent a lot of time doing resume workshops and networking workshops and trainings and helping people figure out how to navigate getting a job in politics. And a good friend of mine who was a tech industry insider had written a book called The Google Resume. And she said, you should do this for politics. And I said, no. There's not enough people who would need this. We have all these informal channels. And then I sat down one night with my husband, who also used to work in politics, and started to outline what would be in a book, and then started to write. And it was easier than I thought it would be. It's not very thick. It's not Tolstoy, but I thought that there was a lot of advice that I just gave over and over and over again. And it would be easier to just kind of point people in one direction. This was back in 2011. And so, times have changed, and now I could just kind of make a Medium post and tell the world. But a number of people have told me that it's been helpful to them, and I certainly didn't write it to make any money. It's always on sales, and I'm happy to give them away because I just want people to be able to have the advice and feel like they can get a handle on this, and not feel like they have to be wealthy or be well connected in order to break into this industry.
There used to be something called Plum Books, but what is a Plum Book?
The Plum Book is the list of political appointees that the president has to make. And it is really the guide, essentially, for people who are looking to go into the administration. It will kind of tell you not only what jobs are available, but what department they fall under, what part of the administration, who they report to, so that you're able to kind of get a sense of where your experience falls in. But yes, that's on the Government Services Administration website, or you can just Google Plum Book. Generally, incoming administrations set up kind of a clearinghouse website for you to apply generally to these jobs without having to get too specific. You can kind of indicate which department or which areas of expertise you have, so that you're considered for a number of different roles and not just one of those 4,000 listed in the Plum Book. And the Biden administration has indicated that this is also how they will do it. And so you kind of have to work your inside game and your outside game. So you need to go through the formal channels of applying, and then work your contacts and work your relationships, and tell people who might have more experience or more connections than you what types of roles you're interested in, and just be very persistent.
So are there, so Plum Book is not out for this year, and Biden administration hasn't come up with a website either, it seems like.
The Plum Book is pretty consistent from administration to administration, but no, I have not seen the job application website up for the Biden transition yet. You should, if people are interested in working for the Biden administration, they should regularly check the transition website. They also have a transition Twitter account that is helpful for that kind of information. But they probably are not able to formally launch that until the GSA says that he is the president-elect and the formal transition begins, which unfortunately is being delayed for political reasons now.
Wow. So it will come, and they will have a shorter time to go through. Probably these people who have connection and relationships, they are probably already submitting their resume, don't you think?
Very much so. And that is something people should do. You should be updating your resume and sending it out, and then the formal process will follow.
And we'll put the link for your book up there. So it will, hopefully that will be. Now, give me some lessons which your book has for people who aspire to work for the government. I mean, public service, in my view, is a very big responsibility. I mean, one should be very humble and prepare and seek God's help to serve people. Serving people is a beautiful thing to do. I don't know if the government jobs provide more or less as compared to corporate jobs, probably provide less. But it's a service. People need to aspire to serve, not to make money there.
Right.
But what are your tips if people are motivated to serve? What they should do?
Yeah, all of the things you just said are absolutely true. You do need to be very humble. You're likely not going to be, setting foreign policy as a junior staffer in the Department of Agriculture. So, but the most important thing is to have a good attitude and to go in being willing to serve, willing to learn, willing to listen, and understanding your role. And I think it is a distraction that some people have come to diminish the role that these government workers play, both civil servants, career civil servants, as well as the political appointees, because the vast majority are doing it out of the goodness of their heart and are doing it to serve. And I think we should recognize that there are a lot of people who could be making a lot more money doing other things and instead choose to be part of our government, whether for short term or long term, and that is admirable and should be applauded rather than dismissed. So have a great attitude, and kind of set your expectations going in. The best way to kind of get one of these jobs is to try to network, and network can kind of sound icky to people. It can sound like you're, being a slickster who's just out there to have transactional relationships with people. But, go have a virtual Zoom meeting with people who had jobs that are interesting to you, and learn what their path was to those jobs. It's often not linear. It's often that, you do something over here and you meet someone over there and that person's helpful to you over here, rather than it being that you start as a junior person in one role and just move your way up. You can find new opportunities and jump around and take on additional responsibilities.
So relationship, of course, you need to prepare yourself and resume. Do they need to declare in resume the political work they have done?
Yes, that's helpful. Even volunteer work is extremely helpful. And one of the big things I talk about in the book is this idea of translatable skills, that, you don't have to have been a government worker before in order to have a skill set that will be valuable in the government. In fact, I think having a wide variety of backgrounds is more helpful. But be able to talk about what you accomplished rather than just what your job responsibilities were. So for instance, on a presidential campaign, there are thousands of people who were field organizers. You all had the same type of job responsibility and could write the exact same bullets on your resume. So why were you a good field organizer? What did you accomplish? If you were on the Biden campaign, but working in a Republican area, were you able to increase Democratic performance even if you didn't win that area? If you were a fundraiser, what creative things did you do during a pandemic to be able to draw people into the campaign? So listing your accomplishments is really important in these roles, and certainly being able to put that succinctly on a resume is important.
How important are references in the resume?
I'm sorry, say that again.
References?
References. I usually don't list references on my resume. I have them available, and think about who is the right reference for this job. You may have a list of 5 or 6 references who will say nice things about you, but who are the 2 or 3 who can speak to this particular role, or maybe who know someone who might be involved in the hiring process. I joke also that LinkedIn is the best spy tool we ever created for finding a job. You can not only find people who who might be able to be helpful to you, but you can find people who have a role similar to what you're looking for, even if they are 10 or 15 years older than you. You can kind of look at what their career path was. Even the busiest person has some time to be able to help someone coming up. I had so many people early on in my career who would take me out for coffee and give me half an hour of advice, and I could ask the silly questions. And almost everyone is willing to do that because we had people do that for us. So you have to kind of pass that baton on as you move up in your career, and help out people just coming up, but they're willing to help if you ask for it.
So watching, and they are interested in public service. They have resumes ready, references are available, but there is no place for them to submit their resumes.
Not yet. There will be. And then also think about state government. Think about that infrastructure and ecosystem that is around government, of think tanks, consulting firms, advocacy organizations. If there's an issue that you're passionate about, going to work for an organization outside the government might actually get you the right kind of experience and the right kind of connections to then go into government and influence the policy more directly. So there's a lot of ways to be helpful other than the kind of traditional government path.
Now, when they announce the website, is it going to be a news or it will just go in among the staffers?
I'm sure it will be publicly announced. I'm not sure that it'll be, a media story. But again, that the Biden transition website will be very helpful to people in looking for that kind of announcement or that news.
Let's talk a little bit about, Democratic Party has gone all the way. I heard that its bylaws require each delegation to be balanced with minorities and to inclusivity and diversity. But Trump has been successful in increasing the voter share in the minority. What he has done to be successful to increase the minority share, which essentially used to be a realm of Democratic Party.
Yeah. He increased it nominally. I mean, he went from about 8% support among African Americans to 11 or 12% support. One thing, too, is exit polls are notoriously unreliable. So we do need to wait a few months to get the actual data back to see. But, he spent a lot of money and a lot of time targeting primarily young African American men and young Latino men in trying to, again, tinker around the edges of that vote share. And sometimes it was in the hopes of not necessarily getting them to support Trump, but getting them to dislike Democrats. So, to his credit, he did pass criminal justice reform. It didn't go far enough as Democrats would have liked, but it was something. And he spent a lot of time communicating about what those reforms did to, in particular, young Black men who are often, those that find themselves in the criminal justice reform, in the criminal justice system, rather. Spent a lot of time communicating with Latino voters of Cuban and Venezuelan and other Central American countries, descent in Florida, with a anti-socialism message that clearly worked because he was able to significantly increase his vote share in Miami-Dade. I think there is an element with some young men who like that he's brash, who like that he's not a typical politician, and respond to that over policy disagreements that they may have. So it's certainly something that Democrats are talking about a lot internally, and about how we bring those voters back.
Now, among the Muslim voters, I checked the Associated Press exit poll, also CARE, which is a Muslim organization nationally, their exit poll, but also someone who did a survey earlier in the year, in March and April, when primaries were still ongoing. And he doubled. By all account, all three surveys, Muslim support for him was about 14-15%, and this time 35%. And this is the guy who came up with the Muslim ban and has things to say, just like about all Latinos are rapists and all Muslims are this, and the countries defining them with the S word and all of that. It's just amazing how he was able to do that. And I have difficulty understanding. But tell me this, the same groups who have come up with these surveys, a couple of them say that Muslim political activism has increased. Mm-hmm. What is your observation? When did you start in political work? And if you compare at that time Muslim participation of people which after, of course, your personal experience as compared to now, has Muslim political activism increased?
I have certainly seen it increase. So I started in politics. I was a volunteer in '96, and then my first part-time paid job while I was still in college was in 1998. And in 2000 and 2004, especially 2004, when I was working on John Kerry's presidential campaign, we primarily talked about Muslim voters through the lens of Michigan. And obviously that is still where a huge concentration of Muslim voters live, but obviously there are enormous pockets of Muslim voters all over Minnesota, Texas, I mean, virtually everywhere. But it's where those larger pockets of the community are, where they are wielding significant political power. And in my home state of Colorado, we just elected our first Muslim American woman to our state legislature, which was great. And we've certainly seen with the increasing profile of, Representative Omar and Representative Tlaib really being able to bring attention to the community. And I think that it's absolutely terrific. I love that the two Muslim members of Congress are both young women. And obviously also Keith Ellison being in statewide office in Minnesota being huge. So it's something that I think we've really seen the community start to come into their own as a political force. And see that exist outside of just the traditional, Dearborn, Michigan example. But one thing that is also really interesting that I've seen wearing kind of my fundraising hat is seeing more Muslim American political donors and political bundlers on both sides. And I do think the increase in support from President Trump is interesting. I'll want to kind of dive into that data and see both nation of origin, how many generations a voter has been in the United States, whether or not they're a small business owner. All of those factors, I think, will influence a voter, and I think that that's something we're also seeing in the Latino community. The longer a voter has been in the States, whether it's that they themselves are older and have been here their whole life, or their family has been here for several generations, that identity as an immigrant becomes less of a factor in their vote. So this is something we'll certainly start diving into once we start getting the actual voter file data back.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us. Fascinating conversation. Alexandra Acker-Lyons is a recognized political commentator and the author of The Political Ladder. If you are looking to climb that ladder, that information will be available there. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you, Sherdil Khan, our producer, and Dr. Abdul Wahid for producing today's show. You have been watching Muslim Network TV. We are 24/7 airing on Galaxy 19 satellite. And of course, you can watch our live stream on Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and your own cell phone by downloading our app, Muslim Network TV. And our website is also Muslim Network.